Utilizing a bag pattern file, let's create a bag. If you simulate the bag with the avatar in the 3D window, the simulation speed will decrease. In order to prevent this, let's delete the avatar from the 3D window. In the main menu, go to File, Import, then select DXF AAMA. Locate the appropriate file, confirm the scale in the option menu, then press OK. Before the patterns are sewn together, let's arrange the patterns. Press the Sync button to reflect the patterns in the 3D garment window. Let's arrange the patterns using the Gizmo tool. With the Transform Pattern tool selected, click on the bottom pattern piece. In the 3D garment window, use the red circle of the Gizmo tool to rotate the pattern, then place it on the floor of the 3D environment. Select all the front pattern pieces, then, in relation to the bottom pattern piece, let's move them to the front. Utilize the Gizmo tool to bring them to the floor of the 3D garment window. Press the 4 key on the keyboard to switch to the right side view, then adjust the front patterns before pressing the 2 key to return to the front camera view. Since these two patterns will be overlapped and sewn, arrange them overlapping each other, but make sure to pull the bottom pattern towards the front. Now, let's arrange the side panel pattern. Select the side panel pattern and move it to the floor of the 3D environment. Utilize the green circle of the Gizmo tool to rotate the pattern, then place it closer to the bottom pattern. Press the 4 key on the keyboard to switch to the right side view, then adjust the side pattern before pressing the 2 key to return to the front camera view. Arrange the opposite side panel pattern in the same manner. Next, let's arrange the back pattern. Select all the back pattern pieces, then move them to where the front patterns are arranged. Press the 4 key on the keyboard to switch to the right side view. Then, utilizing the red arrow of the Gizmo tool, move the back patterns. Press the 8 key on the keyboard to switch to the back camera view, then right-click on the patterns. Within the pop-up menu, select Flip Horizontally. Similar to the front patterns, these two patterns will need to overlap, but make sure to bring the bottom pattern above the other. Once all the patterns have been arranged, press the 2 key to return to the default camera view. Now, let's arrange the zipper patterns as well as the pattern they will attach to. Select all the relevant patterns and move them closer to the other patterns in the 3D environment. Utilize the red circle of the Gizmo tool to rotate the patterns, then press the 4 key on the keyboard to switch to the right side view and move them towards the center of the arranged patterns. In addition, select the zipper patterns and place them above the pattern that they will attach to. Once all the zipper patterns have been arranged, press the 2 key to return to the default camera view. The remaining patterns will be arranged once the overall silhouette of the bag has been simulated. Now let's create the sewing lines. We will utilize the free sewing tool to connect the front pattern pieces. Since these two pattern pieces will be overlapped and sewn, connect the internal line and external segment. In addition, create sewing lines for the sides of the pattern where they overlap. Next, this long pattern will connect to 2 overlapping patterns. To connect these 2 patterns at once, use the one-to-end sewing function. First, establish the sewing line on the long pattern piece. Then, with the Shift key held down, create sewing lines on the sides of the 2 patterns, being mindful of the sewing order. Repeat this for the other side of the bag. Next, we are going to sew up the back pattern pieces. As before, since these two pattern pieces will be overlapped and sewn, connect the internal line and external segment. Make sure to create sewing lines for the sides of the pattern where they overlap as well. Now, connect the long pattern to the two overlapping pattern pieces. Establish the sewing line on the long pattern piece first, then with the Shift key held down, create sewing lines on the sides of the two patterns in the proper order. Repeat this for the opposite side. Connect the side panel with the long pattern piece. Do this for the opposite side as well. Connect the bottom pattern pieces. To connect these three front patterns to the bottom pattern piece, use the one-to-end sewing function. First, establish a sewing line on the bottom pattern piece, then with the Shift key held down, connect the three pattern pieces, maintaining the sewing order. Connect both side panels as well. Similar to the front, use the one-to-end sewing function to connect the back patterns. Start by establishing a sewing line on the bottom pattern, then with the Shift key held down, connect the bottom segments of the three patterns. Now, let's move on to the individual zipper patterns as well as the larger pattern the zippers will attach to. Before establishing the sewing lines, a hole will need to be created for the pattern that the zippers will be attached to. With the Transform Pattern tool, click on the internal shape within the larger pattern piece. Once selected, right-click on the internal shape and select Convert to Hole. Notice that a hole has appeared where the internal shape once was. Select the Segment Sewing tool and connect the zipper patterns to the hole created. Then, sew the zipper patterns together. Finally, sew the larger pattern to the bag. Once you have completed sewing, make sure that none of the sewing lines are crossed. Before simulation is activated, let's deactivate the patterns that have yet to be sewn. With the Transform Pattern tool, select these patterns. Right-click on them and select Deactivate. If we simulate in the current state, the bag will droop, so let's apply a more rigid fabric setting. Within the Object Browser, go to the Fabric tab and click on the Add icon. Navigate to the Property Editor and within the presets, select R Gabardine. To increase the stiffness, click on the small arrow located next to Details for an expanded menu, then increase the bending settings to 70. To apply this newly created fabric setting, select all the patterns, then drag and drop the fabric to the patterns. Activate simulation. Drag on the bag to adjust its shape. And once complete, turn off simulation. Now we are going to sew the handle patterns as well as the hardware details. First, we are going to sew these 3 patterns, then sew the handle patterns. With the free sewing tool, connect the external segment of this pattern to the internal line located on the front pattern. In the 3D garment window, right-click on the pattern that was just sewn and select Activate. Arrange the pattern closer to where it has been sewn. Activate simulation, and then once the pattern has been attached nicely, turn simulation off. This pattern will attach to the previously sewn pattern, but since it serves as a loop for the ring pattern, be mindful that this pattern will eventually be folded. Sew the external segment of the loop pattern to the internal line of the previously sewn pattern. However, since the equivalent length of the internal line is not marked on the pattern, we will need to input the sewing line length as we connect these patterns. First, establish a sewing line on the internal line. Then as you click and drag on the loop pattern, right-click on the segment. In the pop-up menu, input the sewing line length, then click OK. Repeat this for the opposite side of the loop pattern. To fold the loop pattern, let's adjust the fold angle located at its center. With the Edit Pattern tool, select the internal line and adjust the fold angle to 0 degrees in the Property Editor, then press Enter. In the 3D garment window, right-click on the pattern that was just sewn and select Activate. Arrange the pattern closer to where it has been sewn. Right-click on the pattern, then select Flip Vertically. Utilizing the Gizmo tool, adjust its location. Activate simulation. And once the pattern begins to fold over, turn simulation off. Before the loop pattern is sewn, let's insert the ring pattern. The ring pattern requires a hole, so within the Edit Pattern tool, select the internal circle. Right-click on the selected internal circle and select Convert to Hole from the pop-up menu. Notice that a hole has appeared within the pattern. However, if you observe the ring pattern in the 3D garment window, it appears sharp and angular. This is because the current particle distance setting is larger than the ring pattern itself. To resolve this issue, select the ring pattern and change its particle distance setting to 3, and then it will become circular in the 3D garment window. Next, right-click on the ring pattern and select Activate. Arrange the ring pattern closer to the loop pattern. To provide simulation stability And to prevent the ring pattern from falling to the ground once it has been properly arranged, right-click on the pattern and select Freeze. Let's finish sewing the loop pattern. With the Freeze Sewing tool selected, establish sewing lines for the internal circles. Use the Transform Pattern tool to select the internal line located in the center of the pattern and press the Delete key. Activate Simulation, and once the sewing lines have been applied, turn simulation off. These three patterns will be copied and placed on the opposite side. Within the 2D pattern window, select all three patterns, press Ctrl+C to copy, and then Ctrl+R to mirror paste. Click once in the 2D environment to place the mirrored patterns. All these sewing lines have been copied, except for the sewing lines connecting to the front pattern, so let's sew them now. Select the Free Sewing tool and establish the appropriate sewing lines. With the Transform Pattern tool, select the three pattern pieces and then arrange the patterns where they will need to be sewn. Once the patterns have been properly arranged, activate simulation, and once the patterns are attached nicely, turn simulation off. Now let's sew the bag handle patterns. Since the handle patterns need to be bent, right-click on the patterns and select Activate. Place the patterns close to the bag, and to keep them from falling in the 3D environment, let's affix them with pins. With the W key held down, create a pin at the center of the pattern. To bend the handle properly, create an additional pin on both sides of the pin we just created. Next, activate simulation, and when the handle bends properly, turn simulation off. Select the bag handle pattern, then use the Gizmo tool to move the ends of the handle pattern closer to the rings. Activate simulation again, but this time, create a pin at the end of the handle and arrange it behind the ring pattern. At the end of the bag handle pattern, hold the W key and create two pins. Then, with the Shift key held down, select both pins and click on them to activate the Gizmo tool. Use the Gizmo tool to adjust the pattern placement. Repeat this for the opposite end of the handle. Once the ends of the pattern have been arranged, turn simulation off. The bag handle pattern will be comprised of two layers, with each end forming a loop where the ring will hang from. To create the additional layer for the handle, right-click on the pattern and select Layer Clone. To prevent the newly created pattern from overlapping, let's move it. Then, in the 3D garment window, pull the newly created pattern forward. When the layer clone function is used, the perimeter of the pattern is automatically sewn to the perimeter of its clone, but since we only need a portion of it sewn, select the Edit Sewing tool, click on the sewing line, and press the Delete key. Then, with the Free Sewing tool selected, connect the perimeter of the two handle patterns, excluding the short side segments located at the ends of the patterns. Aside from the pin at the center of the original handle pattern, delete all other pins. Activate simulation. To adjust the shape of the bag handle, move the remaining pin. Once the desired shape has been achieved, turn simulation off. Now, let's attach the handle design detail. Since the cloned handle pattern lies on top of the original handle pattern, the design detail will need to be sewn to the top of the cloned pattern. Once the pattern has been completely sewn, right-click on the Sewn panel in the 3D garment window and select Activate. Arrange the pattern to where it has been sewn. Activate simulation, and once the pattern has been attached nicely, turn simulation off. Next, we are going to sew the handle and hardware patterns. With the Transform Pattern tool, select all the handle and hardware patterns, press Ctrl+C to copy, then Ctrl+R to mirror paste. Click once in the 2D pattern window to place the mirrored patterns. In the 3D garment window, move the copied patterns toward the center, then press the 8 key to switch over to the back camera view. Pull the patterns towards the back, then right-click on the patterns so we can flip them. Within the pop-up menu, select Flip Horizontally. Now, let's sew the handle and hardware patterns to the back of the bag. Use the Free Sewing tool to establish the sewing lines. Click on the Transform Pattern tool once more to select the hardware and handle patterns, then arrange them based on where they are sewn. Once the patterns have been arranged, activate simulation, and when the hardware patterns have attached properly, turn simulation off. To enhance the quality of the bag, aside from the ring patterns, select all patterns and reduce the particle distance to 5. Activate simulation to apply this setting. Then turn simulation off. To delete all pins from the bag, right-click on the bag and navigate to Pins, remove all pins. Lastly, to unfreeze the ring patterns, Right-click on a pattern with freeze applied and select Activate. Since the ring patterns are not rigid as metal rings would be in reality, turning simulation on without freeze applied will alter their shape. Therefore, for the ring patterns, unfreeze them only when the bag has been completed.